Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Markov, and it's always a pleasure to be here on behalf of America's Job Center of California in Santa Barbara. This is a workshop sponsored by the Santa Barbara Workforce Development Board, and it's always a thrill to be here with you today. This presentation is being recorded, and it will be stored in the YouTube channel for America's Job Center of California in Santa Barbara. And there's lots of videos there by myself and other people. And so it's always a good day when I get to come and be with you doing this. So let's get started. You're here today because you're interested in learning how to engage in learning conversations. Now, this is interesting. Actually, I'll be honest, this was sort of a new concept for me. I've been teaching classes in dealing with difficult people for years and years and years. And there's lots and lots of different kind of techniques to do that because, of course, we run into conflicts with coworkers. We need to negotiate salary or accommodations with our employer or our boss. And it's very important that we learn how to handle and face these difficult conversations with confidence. Right? And the key is to sort of have a shift in the way we think about it. And they call that like reframing it. So we say difficult conversations and we get really, oh no, they're difficult conversations, right? It's going to be difficult. But what if we started to think about things like this? Difficult people can actually be our greatest teachers. You know, this is the essence of what we're going to talk about today, because I used to teach a class called conflict resolution, and it was to emerging leaders in organizations. Usually they were newly promoted supervisors, so they'd done their job really well. Now they were having to get a group of people to do the job themselves as well as they did it to get that promotion. So they were having all sorts of challenges. You know, this is one of the biggest leaps we make in our career. And so we had this class called Resolving Conflict. And I said, no, we got to change the name. We're not calling it conflict resolution. We're going to call it conflict management, because you can't get rid of conflict in your life, nor can you get rid of difficult people, right? It's all perspective. And by the way, sometimes we're the difficult people ourselves. But the key is to appreciate those conflicts and those challenging, difficult people as our greatest teachers. So it's not what happens to you that matters. It's how you respond to what happens to you that matters. This is what really makes the difference. And this was from Zig Ziglar. He was a big motivational speaker probably 100 years ago, and we're still quoting Zig Ziglar. One of the things I love about the language he used here is the word respond, because any kind of key to facing any kind of opportunity or challenge is not just reacting, but finding the time to really center ourselves so we're able to respond. Now, this is a lot easier said than done. I'm sure my husband will agree. I work at being responsive. I'm actually pretty good at it at work, not so good in my personal life, but I'm working on it, right? We're all a work in progress. And I say that because what we're talking about today isn't easy, but it is important to really be able to build your skills at this. So this is really important. You can't control other people. You can only control how you respond to them. You know, sometimes I ask people, I get like case studies of these kind of situations. Like, can you change that other person? Well, no, you can't change another person. Can you change the situation? Well, not in the past. You could learn some lessons and set things up so the same situation doesn't present itself in the future, but you can't go back in the past and change the situation. The only thing you really can do is change yourself, change your approach, your perspective, and how you respond to any given situation. And again, this is much easier said than done. So I love this quote. It says, one of the best gifts you can give yourself is to stop being surprised when someone behaves exactly the way they always do. It's not shocking. It's not drama worthy. It's consistent. And consistency is something we can plan for. So I'm not telling you that people are always consistent, but we as humans tend to have some patterns. And one of the first things you can do is, well, first recognize your own patterns, right? There are things that can happen that can just, I mean, people say trigger. Trigger seems to be for me like a psychological kind of a term that means, I don't know, someone's going to have a nervous breakdown or something. I don't mean it that strongly. It can just happen in our day-to-day life. Someone looks at you the wrong way or says a comment that just sets you off, right? But then stop. Notice in yourself the kind of reactions that you have and stop yourself to be able to respond and then evaluate, is this a pattern in the other person? Look, again, this is easier said than done, but that's really important because I'm not going to say again that people are always consistent, but we do have patterns. And if you notice a pattern in someone, the place to start to interact with them more effectively is planning for that pattern. So you have someone and you bring up a challenging situation and they shut down. Is that a pattern for them? And if that's the case, how's the best way to be able to engage in a conversation at all? Or maybe there's someone else and, you know, it's going to be a conversation that sparks in them some kind of anger. Is this a pattern for them? If it is, guess what? You can plan for it. And that's what's really important because rather than difficult conversations, we want to really plan it out. And we may be the only one in this conversation that's done this kind of thinking process prior to engaging in what is anticipated to be a difficult conversation based on these patterns. We can plan for it and switch the approach to being a learning conversation, right? Because I think we can all be open to learning about ourselves, about others, right? Rarely is conflict, or it shouldn't be. It's too bad if it is. But really, in a professional environment, conflict should not be about right or wrong. It often is, but it's not really professionally mature. In work, particularly, but it can be in your personal life too. You know, conflicts are an opportunity to make something better. You know, I have this quote and it talks about how nature uses conflict to actually create beautiful things. Think about the Grand Canyon, right? That was the conflict between rock and water. This summer, I went to Bryce Canyon. Bryce Canyon is stunning, and it's a certain kind of rock that is eroded away by ice. So it has a different pattern of the conflict that makes something so beautiful. If any of you have been to Zion National Park or Yosemite or any of them, you see in nature that the conflict, usually between water and soil or stone or anything, a fire, you know, it can create some really different changes that might actually be beneficial. And I know in California, I talk about fire, but you know, the forest management, a lot of forests, they're intended to burn down so the new growth can come up. Of course, we don't like it, but what is the opportunity here in these difficult and challenging conversations that we need to have? That's a really good perspective to see what we're going to learn. So again, you know, erase from your mind that you're going to resolve every conflict, because guess what? You can't do that. But you can learn skills to manage conflict better. And this is what we're going to talk about today, specifically how to change a difficult, challenging conversation into a learning conversation. Now, this material comes from a book that's called Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters. And I'll tell you, the technique really came from another organization. It was based on this book, what I've read, but it was in the context of a course in a coaching certification course I took through an organization called Leadership in Motion. So in this book, they talk about 3 major errors when we're conversing with people. Okay. The first one is that we make assumptions, right? We already know what we need to know to understand and explain the situation. I already know what's going on. The next one is we hide our feelings or we let them loose, right? This is about being passive aggressive, right? We don't want to share our feelings, or then we just dump them. That's not a really productive way of interacting with people either. In fact, it kind of scares people. Or we ignore who we are and act as if our identity is separate from the issues. Well, when these issues happen, we can't totally separate our identity from the situation, right? I had a conflictual situation at work just a few weeks ago. So I am a consultant. I work on training projects. Sometimes I'm actually the training facilitator, like in this class, I actually design what we're going to talk about and I deliver it, but sometimes I only play one of those other roles. So I was on a large training project, a team of like 12 people, and my job, and I was the only one who did this, was to develop the materials, and it was in a virtual environment. So I was building Google Sites and Google Docs and that kind of thing. Anyway, that was my role. And there was a training facilitator who really could not understand what I was doing because it was a beta test and I was working as we were going. So a beta means we're learning as we go. And I was being asked by the rest of the team to be producing more things in the middle of the training. But this woman didn't like the fact that I was creating these things. And actually, we had a conflict. So it's interesting because usually I'm pretty go with the flow, but in this case, the way in which she kind of threw me under the bus, right? She made a lot of assumptions about what role I was playing. She was very aggressive in the way in which she interacted with me and others. She actually embarrassed me in front of a group of people that were really important. And again, usually I'm pretty calm, cool, and collected. I did react, then I calmed down to respond better. But my point is that sometimes we ignore who we are and act as if our identity doesn't matter. But that isn't the case. Sometimes our identity really was at stake. The reason why this was a conflict for me that got bigger than just the issue was because she emailed a bunch of people that were important in my world. Now, the good thing about this is that those people came to my rescue and clarified her assumptions about my role. And I actually had an opportunity to productively express my feelings and advocate for myself. So when we ignore who we are sometimes not able to advocate for ourselves in the right way. And that's what I'm talking about here, because being passive aggressive is not the right way. We need to find a way to advocate for ourselves, be authentic about our feelings, and open up a conversation so that we don't lose some of the assumptions. Right. And sometimes it's us that's clarifying the assumptions. Sometimes it's the other person that gets the assumptions clarified. Sometimes everybody clarifies their assumptions. And in fact, on this training project, there was this conflict between the two of us. The result of it was that as a training team, we actually had a big meeting and the powers that be clarified everything for everyone. And it was better. And it was a learning conversation. So I explained that it wasn't smooth and clean and there were a lot of emotions, right? But in the end of the day, we approached it as an opportunity to learn about each other, the roles that we were playing, and clarify exactly what we were doing on this project. And it ended up being a much better outcome. So let's move on, because I want you to take out a piece of paper, because on this paper, I want you to write some questions, because when you're facing a difficult conversation or when you're facing some kind of a conflict, the first thing you need to do is start to do some self-reflection. And I know we've got some people in the class who've been in my classes before. I'm really big on self-reflection. So being able to ask yourself some of these questions is really key. So when you find that you're kind of, you're feeling your emotions kind of gather in you, and oh, we're heading into a difficult conversation, rather than just blow or run for the hills, stop, right? This is about responding, not reacting. And reacting is fight or flight, right? You're either gonna like mama bear, or you're gonna run for the hills. So stop when you get that feeling. And again, on a piece of paper, I want you to sort of outline some of these questions. It's not the first set of questions I'm going to ask you in this class, but the first thing is you want to really diagnose for yourself what is making this difficult, right? Allow yourself the opportunity to really feel the feelings that you're feeling, what emotions are coming up, and be clear. Think about, we talked about patterns a minute ago. What are your patterns? I know sometimes I get angry when I'm actually sad. So it takes me time to stop and really realize I'm actually not angry. I'm kind of sad about the situation. What's your pattern, right, in that? And this is it too. What are your patterns in similar situations to other conversations in the past? Sometimes we're facing a difficult conversation and we are assuming that it's going to be the same as this other conversation, right? Or maybe you had a hurtful, painful interaction, conversation with someone, and we project those kind of feelings of fear or dread onto something that maybe it's not going to be like that at all. So really what you're trying to decide is, why is this difficult? This is important. So write that down. The second question is, think, and this is where this self-reflection, right? Put yourself in the mindset of being the best, most rested, calm. Probably should have put fed self, right? This idea of hangry, right? When my kids were little and they would get all wound up or nasty about something, first thing I'd say is, here, have something to drink, have something to eat, go sit down on the couch for a little while. Usually food helped a lot, but also resting, etc. But I want you to put yourself in the mind frame of, imagine that I was really in my best self. I was well rested, I was well fed, I was calm. How would I act? Right? Because that's how you want to act when you're facing a difficult conversation or a conflict with someone. And then the really key here is, how can you open your mind to say, hey, maybe I'm going to learn something. I learned this lesson years and years ago. I'm an only child, and I married a man with 3 older sisters. I put 4 because he had a younger niece who was kind of raised like a sister to him. So there were like 3 women in the same generation as me. I don't even understand sibling relationships at all. And in the beginning, it was very difficult. Now we're all very close. But I had a difficult conflict with one of the sisters. It was very emotional. And actually, even though it was messy and we didn't move through it, at the end of it, I thought, wow, I know her so much better now. I ended up being grateful for that. And she and I are very close, and we've talked about that. So it helped me gain that perspective, which I think is really key to being effective at this, which is, what can I learn from this situation? This really reflects one of my favorite writers in the whole world, which is Stephen Covey, who said, seek to understand and then be understood. And this is really important. This is one of my mantras, because when you seek to understand first, you not only are moving beyond all of your assumptions and learning about the other person and reframing the situation for yourself, because there may be a lot of things you didn't really understand about it, but the seeking to understand, it puts you in the driver's seat, right? You don't want to just jump to conclusions and start jumping all over people. And in fact, that little scenario I told you about that recently happened at work, actually, the woman who was very upset with me, she did not understand what my role was. The powers that be had asked me to do this work during the training. She thought I was distracting her, but she'd not been on one of these development projects before. And so actually, she jumped to conclusions based on her assumptions. And in the end, she looked kind of silly because in the meeting, the powers that be clarified everybody's role and actually congratulated me for doing so much work and getting it where it was. This wasn't a normal kind of project like just do a training. This was a development project, and my role was unique. And so seeking to understand and then be understood might even just resolve the issue, but it certainly is going to put you in the driver's seat so you don't respond or react in a way that actually makes you look foolish, right? This is very, very important. So you need to prepare for what I'm calling this learning conversation. Let's stop talking about difficult conversation. Let's really try to adopt that mindset. Hey, I'm going to learn something here. So there are really 3 things you need to do to prepare for the learning conversation. And this is all, again, the things that you do prior to engaging with the person. So again, first, we asked you to sort of diagnose where you are. Now, this is clear preparation for the learning conversation. So again, on your piece of paper, write preparing for the learning conversation. And I'm going to give you 3 questions, but then I'll take a deep dive. So you might want to put these 3 questions with a few lines in between. So the first one is, what happened, right? You want to see what happened. You want to consider, how does it make me feel? And if you've done this part before, those other questions I asked, you might already know that, but this is part of preparing for the learning conversation. And the third thing is, how does this threaten my identity? Remember, we talked about this. How does this impact me? How does this reflect on me, my professionalism, my place and role in whatever societal group or family group I'm in where this conflict is taking place? This is how we prepare for the learning conversation. So I'm going to walk through each of these 3 different things you need to do to prepare for the learning conversation. I put this in here because this is an analogy. When there is a car accident, right? What the policemen say is that actually in any car accident, there are 2 stories and the facts, right? I am using that word, the facts, very deliberately. I could say the truth, but guess what? One person, the guy in the green car, he thinks his story is the truth. And the woman in the red car, she thinks her story is the truth. So the policeman is not looking for the stories that everybody will hold on to and say it's true. He's looking for the facts, right? And, I don't believe in these alternative facts, particularly on the ground for, normal people like us. We got to be looking at what's factual. Well, in this situation, he was driving the green car. She was driving the red car. They crashed, and, they've exchanged information. So, not to go down that rabbit hole of this analogy, but I think you understand what I'm saying. It's not about I'm right and you're wrong. It's about really being honest and saying, okay, what are the facts in the situation? Going back to my little story, this woman and I that were having a problem, we're on a 12-member training team. That's true. We each have very specific roles. That's true. My role is to develop material. That's true. She has never been on one of these training teams before. That's true. Her role is very different than mine. That's true. So you see, you kind of get the facts out there. So what happened? Who said what, who did what, who's right, what should have happened. Now, again, with the facts are not interpretation. So say, in that analogy with the car, you don't want to say, well, he's driving a green car and that means that he is environmentally friendly. That's an interpretation. The fact is he was driving the green car, but you don't know what that means. She's driving the red car, so she must be, wanting to drive really fast. That is an interpretation. Not everybody who drives a red car drives fast. So this is what I'm talking about. We have to be very clear, and sometimes this is hard. What is the difference between the interpretation of what happened and the facts? So we need to do some real good thinking about that. And that's really important for us. The next, we have to be very careful about assumptions, right? So assumption is a thing that's accepted as true and as certain to happen without any proof, right? And also assumptions are an action of taking on power or responsibility. And sometimes we assume a sense of superiority because we know what's going on, when in fact, our sense of superiority or taking on this power, I'm right and you're wrong, is really based on a bunch of assumptions. So we need to be careful, because when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me, right? Good way to remember how to spell that name, right? But we have to be careful because, again, I've seen it over and over in other people, but also in myself, that when we make assumptions, hey, we make an ass out of each other. So we got to be careful, right? We have to not be pointing fingers and thinking that the other guy is always guilty, right? It's we can think that people are guilty, or we can say, hey, we both contributed to this, which is true. So that's important. So when you blame others, actually, you're giving your power away. When you take responsibility, you take back your power, right? Okay, so this is some motivational thing to transform your life, but it works, right? When you're dealing with some kind of mundane conflict at work, right? Don't blame others. To your face, a lot of people are going to say, okay. What's more important is what they say when you're not around. When you're blaming others and acting out aggressively, actually we're going down the road of being a bully. And, it may feel very powerful, but it's actually a very poor form of influence, and it is not leadership. But when we take responsibility for our part of it, not more than we need to, but we take responsibility for what we did. But also, how about take responsibility to setting up a situation in the future that would be more successful? So going back to that conflict I told you about, this woman was unhappy with the actions I was taking in this testing of this training, because she thought that I wasn't actually paying attention to her when I had been asked by the leaders to fix things. So actually it would be better for her when she started delivering it, right? So I took responsibility for the fact that, yeah, you're right. I was developing stuff while you were talking, because I was asked to do that and I was preparing it for you. And then guess what I did? I took responsibility for really put the pressure on everybody to hold a meeting to get the ship righted. And it actually happened. So you take responsibility for your part, but also take responsibility for finding a way out of this, creating space for learning, right? That's the whole point here. It's not a yelling match. It's let's all come together and recontract how we're going to work with one another, clarify everybody's roles and responsibilities, move beyond the assumptions, take responsibility for being the one that shifts it into that learning mode. So you want to ask yourself, what trap am I in? How did I contribute to the problem? If I am in a trap and I did contribute to this, then what do I need to do? And often when I ask myself those questions, not only do I know that I need to, some people call it falling on your sword. You don't want to do that all the time, but meaning that you don't want to just be taking responsibility for things that weren't yours, but really honestly saying, yeah, hey, I screwed up. I did that. Lord knows I make mistakes every day. I don't often see them and know them, but when I do, I like to say, I'm sorry. I like to see what we can do to move beyond it. So that's one form of responsibility. But again, what do I need to do? How can you be create a path for learning to help manage these situations better. So again, that's two-part. Difficult conversations are always about your feelings, right? And they're very difficult because if we're not aware of our feelings, then our unexpressed feelings end up doing this to us, right? We can just burst out with them, or we run for the hills, right? I remember years and years ago, I was working on a team. I was actually the team lead, and it was a multi-organizational group. And there were people that didn't want to be there, but they were forced by their boss to be there. And I knew that. And I worked hard to kind of open people up and get them to realize the benefit of being part of this. And I had one participant who, she didn't do this. She actually did just the opposite. She just shut down. And I talked to her and she said, well, I don't know why you're talking to me. I'm not creating any problems in the group. I said, I know that, Diane, but this is a team effort. We want to hear your opinion, even if it's different. I want to create a safe space for you to participate because you have great, valuable ideas that we want. I know you don't want to be there. I'm not your boss. They assigned you here, but I'm here to help create a safe space for us to learn from you. And actually, she started opening up. But I say that because we could burst out or we could shut down. Our job is to notice those things and create that safe space for learning. So when we burst out, it makes it hard to actually listen. So see, this woman is like yelling in the phone, but look, you know, the headset isn't near her ear. So how is she able to listen and learn? She's not. So we need to be sure that we are managing our emotions, really aware of them and able to respond rather than react to situations. So feelings are neither right or wrong. They just exist. And guess what? We can change them. You know, it's funny because my beginning part of my career, I worked in all female environments. That was very comfortable for me. I was raised by a single mom. I actually went to an all girls boarding school, if you can believe it. I don't even know if those things exist anymore, but I did at the time. My first 20, maybe not that long, first 10 years of professional work, I always had a female boss, worked mostly with women. I was in nonprofits, and there were a few men, but for the kind of work that I did, it was mostly women. And when I first entered a workplace that was really more male dominated, and again, this is not a class on gender relations, but I do want to make a point here. You know, people were talking about, oh, women, you're a woman leader, women are so emotional. And you know what was funny? I thought, well, look around. I was the highest ranking woman in this nonprofit organization. And I'd go to these big meetings and I'd be, you know, the only woman in the room. And I'd look around and these men were like, they were all over the place. Maybe they were expressing it about different topics or maybe a little bit differently. But I thought, why are you saying women are emotional? You guys are just as emotional. I think maybe it's that, you know, men are from Mars and women are from Venus thing. We kind of, maybe we don't really understand each other's emotions, but nevertheless, you know, good relationships you do. Nevertheless, everybody is emotional and it's neither right or wrong. We have to acknowledge that they exist. And guess what? How quickly can you change your emotions like that, right? Let's say we're sitting here and the big earthquake happened. I hope not. But if that were to happen, how quickly would your emotions change? In a heartbeat. Right? So we need to know that emotions exist and we can change them. And when we learn something new, it's one of the best ways to change them, because when we learn something new and bring something new in that changes our perspective, then maybe we won't experience that same emotion in a similar situation or with those people. So there's kind of a cycle of thinking. We think about something, we interpret something, right? It creates a feeling in us, and then we do something as a result. This is why I was talking about the difference between interpretation and fact. So the first way in which we think about something, 9 times out of 10 is going to be your interpretation of it. And your interpretation is based on your experience, your education, your perspective on things, right? So we need to try, especially when we're facing challenging conversations and conflict, to stop ourselves from going in the thinking of interpretation and really get to the facts, because it might impact how we feel about things. And then we're likely to do something actually more productive. So this is important, and it influences how we react. You know, they said, stop, count to 10 before you react. That's actually pretty good advice, but it doesn't tell you what you're supposed to do in your mind. And so I would say, start looking at the facts first. Start asking some of these questions we've already asked, because when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I'll bet each and every one of you can think of a situation where in the beginning you thought it was one way and then you thought it was another. My husband is a personal trainer. He's actually very skilled. He has some great clients. And I'll tell you honestly that he had this client that honestly, he had met this person socially, and he decided that he didn't like them for whatever reason. And then this person came to them and asked him if he would be their personal trainer. And actually, he wasn't super happy about this. My experience and an interpretation of this person was different. And so I really encouraged him. I said, you know, honey, I don't think your perspective on this person is right. I've had a good experience with this person. You know, they may appear this way in these social settings, but I've been in, you know, one-on-one conversations and they didn't come across that way. You know, they were appeared kind of snotty and aloof, and but one-on-one they weren't. In fact, the person's kind of shy. And when they get into these social settings, they're not actually acting the way they want to because they're feeling very insecure. You know, doesn't that change the way you think about it? It wasn't arrogance, it was insecurity. And sometimes people don't know. I mean, anytime we're insecure, we don't act the way we ordinarily act. So anyway, I encouraged him. And now, you know what? This person has been his client for like 8 years, and they've become very good friends. So change the way we look at things, and the things we look at change. There's opportunities there. That example is good. My husband learned more about this person, and it changed the way he thinks and interacts. And it's been a really fulfilling professional, and it's turned into professional. You know, we socialize with this person sometimes. So very nice. This is what we're hoping to do. You know, I have to talk about this. And of course, you know, Frank Zappa said this, but yeah, our mind is like a parachute. If it's closed, it doesn't work, right? We crash and burn. That's when we explode, or we don't stand up for ourselves. We lose out in some way. We've got to open our mind like that parachute. And when we're facing difficult conversations, we really need an open mind. To discover new ways of thinking about the situation and practice our skill at responding instead of reacting. So this is actually based on the work of a woman I really admire. Her name is called Carol Dweck, and she wrote a book about mindsets. And so she describes a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And here on the screen, you can kind of read some of the different things, but it really helps us set the tone for a learning perspective. When we're fixated on things, we're not going to learn anything. But when we're open, hey, we have the opportunity to learn, grow, develop, and unfold. And you know what? This isn't something that stops as we get older. Recently, my husband and I moved in with his 87-year-old mother to take care of her. It's very interesting because I will say that she really is fixed. Her mindset is fixed on a lot of things. But I give her a lot of credit because there are areas that my husband and I have really sort of pushed her into where she's really opened up and learned a lot. So I know this is going to sound a little silly, but part of her kind of upbringing and interactions, you know, she had, believe it or not, never been to a potluck. So she did work when she was, you know, before she started having kids and got married. But I guess maybe in those days they didn't do potlucks. So I mean, I don't know anybody who works that hasn't been to a potluck, maybe not in COVID times, but that seems pretty common thing around here. But she grew up in the plains of Colorado, and I think they didn't do potlucks in that same way. People would get invited over to other people's houses, but she hadn't been to a potluck, or at least she said she hadn't. Maybe she hadn't for many, many years. Anyway, we have this wonderful group of friends and neighbors, and we were invited to a 4th of July potluck, and she really didn't want to go. You know, she had, we had to be there like 4 o'clock, which was too early for her to eat, but she already had set aside food for her to eat when she came home. Anyway, we go to this, and our friends are like gourmets, and my husband's a chef. So we brought a beautiful dish, as did everybody else. It was the most gorgeous buffet of food. Yeah, it came from everybody's house, but it was beautiful, beautiful food. And my mother-in-law sat there. She had a glass of wine, and everybody's eating. And she said, okay, I'm going to eat. And she did. And it was so funny because when we came home, she's like, oh, I've never been to a potluck before. And I really loved it. The food was so good. And it was so fantastic. Oh, take me to another potluck. So, you know, even at 87 years old, we can open our mind to learning new things and trying new things. You know, another quick story about her, poor little thing, she broke her arm, her right arm. She's right-handed. And I've been trying to get her to read the paper on her iPad, and she refuses because she's got to have these pieces of paper that, by the way, cost a fortune, ruin the rainforest, creates all this trash, blah, blah, blah. So I've been trying to say, hey, you got this great iPad, why don't you use it? No, 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 no. I don't like online stuff. I will never be able to use it. Blah, blah, blah. She broke her arm. And I'm sorry, I do a lot of things for her, but I'm not going to sit and, you know, for 2 hours every morning and turn the pages of the paper for her. So I really worked at training her to use her iPad. And just yesterday, she came to me and she said, you know what? That subscription to the New York Times cost me $87 a month, and I don't want to pay it anymore because I like reading it online. Like, score. I've been trying for years to get her to do that. So my point is that we are never too old to adopt a growth mindset. And in this day and age, with technology moving so fast, with the connectivity of people around the world, we're just on a hyper accelerated change and growth and opportunity curve. I know there's some scary things, but in general, it's a really positive movement forward if we're open to it. So we all need to work hard at developing that open mindset. So let's look at the dynamics of conflict. When we're in a conflict, we want to look at, be very clear, what do you want out of this situation? What do you have? So this is the difference between where you are, that's what you have, and where you want to be, right? This is a very common kind of approach in coaching or in diagnosing, you know, any kind of situation. Where am I right now? Facts, not interpretation. And where do I want to be? And then, like, what am I doing to get me where I want to be? So again, here's some questions to ask yourself, and write this down. Questions to ask yourself. Is my strategy, like what I'm doing to get me where I want to get, is it moving me towards what I want? Oftentimes when we're facing these challenging situations and conversations and people, our strategy is not getting us where we want, right? It might even be working against us. This is a very important insight for us to be able to be really honest with ourselves and say, wow, I'm behaving in a way that actually continues this conflict or makes it worse. The next thing, why is what I want reasonable, right? You're diagnosing what you want. And I love that word reasonable. It actually came up in this conflict I was telling you about. This woman who was unhappy with me developing these materials while she was talking, right? It was unreasonable for her to expect that in my role, I wouldn't be doing anything like that, given the situation, right? So then what about me, right? With conflicts that I've had, it's an honest question. Is it reasonable to expect X, Y, Z? And a lot of times when I do this diagnosis with myself, actually what I want isn't reasonable. So this gives me the opportunity to kind of rethink, re-envision, reconceive what I want. That's really important. That's real progress. And then finally, if my perception of the situation is, that should be an is, I'm sorry. What if my perception of the situation is inaccurate? Are you really seeing the situation clearly? Like, what do I have? Ask yourself is, you say, this is what I have, and then stop and kind of step back, like use what I call your third eye or your process observation. Is this really what I have? Maybe my perception of what we have is inaccurate. And when you realize that, you can get very clear, really get clear on those facts, not the interpretation. And finally, is there an alternative way to look at the situation? By asking these 3 questions, I think you come up with that alternative way. And this is really important. So let's start to look at your identity, because your identity is like a shadow. It's not always visible, but it is always there. And a lot of times the emotions come up when we feel like our identity is being challenged, right? Am I competent? Am I a good person? Am I worthy of love? These are very deep questions. And at some level, we're kind of always asking for that, right? We want attention. We want love. We want to know. It's a basic human need to feel love and connection with other people, but also to have a sense of what we call significance, like I'm really special in the world. And this is where our identity comes in, right? So you can never let your feedback that you get define you, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. We all make mistakes. Our intentions are very complex. It is normal to have bad feelings, and lots of things, including our own actions, contribute to whatever situation we're in. And remember, a lot of people haven't asked these questions, and they're working off of assumptions. They're working off of interpretation. So don't let the feedback define you. Give yourself and the other people some grace, and realize that, we all make mistakes. And again, our intentions are all very complex. So we've kind of reviewed the 3 pieces of preparing for that learning conversation. So first, what happened? How does it make me feel? How does this threaten my identity? Now you're ready for that learning conversation. So success happens when opportunity meets preparation. So what we've talked about is preparing for that actual conversation where you sit down with someone, to shift the focus from being a difficult conversation to being an opportunity to learn. And when you know this information, just like seek to understand and then be understood, when you go through a process like this and you can have the really focus and calmness that asking yourself these questions gives you, you can be the leader of this particular conversation and actually help the other person relax and calm down. Remember, seek to understand first. But here are the things you can do when you meet with someone. Whoopsie. Ask and share what you hope to accomplish. Ask the other person. Be very honest about what your contribution was. Ask them what their contribution was. You want to also, before you even enter into this, if I don't talk, how can I let it go, right? So I'm sorry, I kind of misled you here. These are questions before you actually schedule that meeting. What do you hope to accomplish? What was your contribution to the situation? And if I talk, if I don't talk, how can I let it go? Because sometimes you'll find out that maybe it's not worth bringing it up. That might be the case. And that's okay too. But if you've done this thinking process, it'll be a lot easier to let go. So when you actually do start talking, start from the 3rd story. So describe the difference between the 2 stories. Remember the car crash? Share your story, ask them to share their story. We're looking for the gap. Lots of times you find there are things that are aligned. And that's a great foundation for having a productive learning conversation. Well, we see things a little bit different, but there are things we can agree on, that this conflict between us is actually slowing down our progress at meeting our goals. Okay, we agree. Good, right? So through this, you both describe the differences between your two stories. You share and find that common purpose. Okay, so this is slowing us down. How committed are you to the goal? You're really committed, so am I. Okay, so we're in this together and solving this. You want to invite that other person to really join you, to be your partner, to work through this situation. Do it together, and that you can commit to learning, right? Ask the person, hey, you want to learn about this? Let's learn together how to be better at managing these kinds of situations. We can learn about each other. People are often, it's easier a sell to get them to learn than it is maybe even to resolve. So explore their story and yours. Listen to understand the other person's perspective. Remember, seek to understand and then be understood. Ask questions, acknowledge their feelings. Oh, so, but be careful. Don't interpret their feelings, right? Maybe their face is all screwed up and you say, oh, yes, I understand you're angry. I'm not angry, right? No. You listen. And if they say I'm angry, or they say I'm sad or upset, even though they might be demonstrating something different, acknowledge their feelings, and even don't put a label on it. I can see that this is upsetting to you. You know, upsetting is sort of a neutral word, but maybe not. I mean, this is the finesse of this conversation, but you definitely want to say that you've heard the words, but you also acknowledge there's a lot of feeling. You know, I've said that it seems like you have a lot of feeling about this. Don't label it, right? And then yeah, I'm angry, or yeah, I'm really sad about this, or yeah, I'm really upset about this. So then you can start to use that to describe it. Just be careful about describing it, but you can say, oh, you know, there's a lot of feeling here. You could even say, hey, we both have strong feelings about this. Identify how you each contributed without blame or judge. The best way to do this is, you know, this is be the leader. Say, hey, I know I contributed to this situation, and this is what I did. How did you contribute to the situation? And you know, you've got some rapport going when they kind of say, okay, yeah, I had something to do with it. If they're still in that situation where they're not willing to acknowledge what they contributed, then ask some more questions, acknowledge some more feelings, try to understand, right? Share your own perspective. And here's some language. And this is later in the conversation, right? When you both acknowledge your contribution, what you're looking for here is hopefully the person will say, yeah, you know, I threw you under the bus with the big guys. Oh yeah. And then it gives you the opportunity to say, well, when you did that, when you threw me under the bus, it made me feel like you were, it made me feel embarrassed in front of these other people. And what would have been more helpful in the future is if you came to me directly and we were able to have a conversation so I could explain to you what my role is. And then if that didn't feel right, then maybe we could both go back to the powers that be and clarify our roles and responsibilities, right? You don't want to start with that. You want to listen, ask questions, acknowledge their feelings. That's sort of the first part. Then try to open up some space for both of you to acknowledge each person's contribution. And then you can share your perspective. When you did XYZ, I felt ABC. What would be helpful in the future is to blah, blah, blah. And then invite them to do that. You can even script it. You know, when I did blah, 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 how did it make you feel? And what would be more helpful in the future for me to do if that situation were ever come again, right? You can walk people through it. I'm sharing with you how to really take the lead, right? Leadership is about influence. How can you positively influence somebody in this challenging thing to move it forward, to solidify and improve your relationship? And once you've done that, now you're in the problem solving mode. So you want to develop options. I mean, these are basic kind of problem solving approaches. You want to develop options for you both to work together. You want to agree to how are we going to function in the future? So agree to some norms, like the next time something like this happens, let's have a little conversation, right? Or next time this happens, let's go out to coffee, or I don't know what it is, but agree to some norms. Identify the lessons that you both learned. Be explicit. Hey, I'm sorry that this situation came up, but what I'm not sorry about is, I learned a lot. I feel like I got to know you better. I understand more about the different roles that we play. And actually, I feel better prepared in order to move forward when I work with you on a team. That was great. And if you feel comfortable, you can even thank them for that. You want to agree to both what you need to do differently. So both of you talk about what you need to keep doing, what you need to stop doing, what you need to start doing. This is a very effective, very simple, very basic kind of action plan. What do you need to keep, stop, start? And this is a great application of that within this problem-solving phase of this kind of learning conversation. So let's look a little bit as time is winding down. What are our best practices? When you hold this meeting, you want to select a time and place for the learning conversation that reduces the stress. You don't want to have this on the fly. You don't want to bring it up in the break room or in the dinner table, right? Where can you set a time and place? I'll tell you something funny. With my husband, a really good place to have these conversations is when we're driving in the car. I don't think that's a secret, but something about it, right? We're both sort of we don't have to look each other in the eye and get mad or get sad or get upset. We're moving forward. We're going somewhere. I like it on a long road trip, but you need to really find the right time and place so that it reduces the stress, whatever works for you. Invite the other person to kind of co-create the agenda and the questions to discuss. Now, this is formal in the workplace, but even with your significant other, you say, I want to have this conversation, this is the purpose. These are kind of things I want to talk about. What do you want to talk about? Get them involved a little bit. Be clear on the purpose and what you're going to do. I am a talker. I could probably talk and talk forever. And I know early on in our marriage, and my husband and I have been married for almost 35 years. It's a wonderful marriage. He doesn't like to talk that much, right? So we set some parameters about this. Yeah, we need to talk sometimes. And the purpose of this conversation is X, Y, Z, but we're going to talk for an hour and then we're not going to talk about it unless we don't make a change and things don't get better. We're not going to talk about it again. If we can, if things get better, if we've learned something from it, right? Because there are people who want to just talk and talk and talk, me, and other people who really just want to have the conversation and put it to bed. And, in some ways I've learned from my husband that might be healthy, as long as there's positive movement forward, improved relations, better rapport, right? If that conversation has made an impact and a change. And end with a summary and clarity on the next steps. So you do want to find a way to summarize what was said, and then clarity on the next steps so that you can really hold each other accountable. So there you go. You guys ready? Can you go out there and have those learning conversations? I know you can. I know you can. So that was what I wanted to share with you today. I think it's a really cool tool. I want to thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. Here is a link to SurveyMonkey. And I think that often you get sent something. I think it's in the YouTube channel. We'd love to hear what you think of them. And you know what? I can stop sharing. I think I can put that in the chat. And I hope you guys got a lot out of this. So see you at the next one.
Thank you, Kathy.
Oh, thank you so much.
It was a really nice class. Thank you for